Hello and welcome to another episode of a Brothers Creed podcast where we inspire fathers to build the blueprint for the next generation. We are the Thomas Brothers, and I'm Ethan.
And I'm Jared. And today we're talking about another one of our attributes that we talk about to help you be a better father, a better husband, a better man. And that attribute is graciousness, or the attribute of having grace, or extending grace. So there's multiple dimensions to this one, and it's an interesting one because it's not typically one that you think of when you say like, "Oh, I'm a real man." You don't think of graciousness.
I'm a real man, full of grace.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting, but there can be powerful strength in graciousness, and it could be a great show of discipline. So excited to get into this conversation today.
All right, let's do it.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day.
You should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it.
No retreat, no surrender.
You can't conceive of what I'm capable of!
There is no tomorrow! There is no tomorrow!
What we do in life, that goes in eternity.
All right. So there's obviously a variety of definitions of graciousness. One that I found, it said it is the quality of being kind, polite, generous, especially to someone of a lower social position. But I think that's probably extended to anybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the definition I found was it says those different things, generous, tactful towards others, kind, courteous. But in the definition that I had seen, it specifically says, especially in social interactions, which is interesting.
Yeah. Whenever I was doing some research on this, the first place I thought of is a Carnival Cruise. Have you ever been on a Carnival Cruise?
I have not, but
Oh, you're going on a cruise later
I've
this
seen
year?
videos.
Yeah, I've seen fight videos. And the people jumping over the side because it's so horrible. That one that got stranded, was that a Carnival Cruise?
I don't know. Although I did hear, I think it might have been Norwegian, but just recently there was a kid that jumped off. Yeah, he was drunk, and him and his dad were having a fight, and he said he told his dad, "All right, I'll solve this right now," and jumped out the window of
Yeah.
like
it was like they're
thing.
in the dining hall. He just stood up from the table and jumped out the window.
Yeah.
Crazy.
And then they did man overboard, but it takes the ship like a mile to turn around,
Mm-hmm.
and they went back but never found him.
Jeez. Crazy.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is not that depressing, but we were on our Carnival Cruise. It was like a 5-day cruise. It was the opposite of graciousness. Everybody was so selfish. Everybody wanted to get in line first. Everybody was sprinting to get the food first. Everybody was so entitled to. It was like this is the attitude of almost everybody on the cruise was, "This is my vacation. I paid for this. I deserve to be here, and I deserve to be in front of the line." It was like, you're on a Carnival Cruise.
I maxed out my credit cards to be here.
Yeah, it's like you're not on a Royal Caribbean or a Norwegian. It's like, so whenever there was food, like everybody was just scrambling to get in line. Whenever we went to get off the boat, everybody was just sprinting, and of course, I gotta catch my flight. Everybody's freaking out. I was like, okay,
Everybody's got to catch their flight.
yeah. Or like when we went to shore. Everybody was just like piling in on like the little boats, the ferry boats, to take you to shore. It was bizarre, and Shannon and I were like, "What is going on here?" It's like, can't even imagine what it would be like in a Titanic scenario where the thing is going down, and it's every man for himself. Like in actuality, it's just like it was the opposite of graciousness. Nobody was considerate, nobody was polite, nobody was anything because everybody was on a vacation and the world had to cater to them. And so I kind of use it as like an opposite example. And maybe this is where my quote comes in on what I think graciousness is. So this is what I said. Graciousness is a mark of sophistication that sets aside the selfish, rude, self-serving, and indulgent behaviors, and puts kindness, politeness, generousness at the forefront of one's actions.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, all those qualities. And we'll get into it too. It's kind of interesting because sometimes it almost feels like kind of an opposite or a counter to masculine culture, right? To be masculine is to be
bold and assertive.
Yeah,
Which there's yes, those things exist, but you can also be polite. You can also be gracious. You can also be generous.
Yeah, and so my quote, I said, so I kind of compared it to a little bit to strength, right? And talking about strength is a person. A lot of people just think, oh, it's physical or whatever. But I said strength is not just physical, but can also be be measured by how a man carries himself and treats others. So that's where that interaction comes. I think the true measure of a person's character is not just the strength of their arm or whatever else, but it's how they treat other people. And I think that Carnival Cruise example is like a perfect example. It's like people are just freaking heathens. They can be. And it's hard in that situation to not act like that as well. Because if you're in that situation and all these other freaking people are going crazy and pushing people around just so they can get first in line, right? It's almost like, well, what do? Do you have grace? You're like, oh, go ahead. Then you're never going to get in line. If you just have these...
It's like a feeding frenzy on Black Friday or something.
There's certain cultures, and maybe I won't specifically name a culture, but you could probably guess it, that like... that I was watching this thing, and it was this lady that was from France or something like that. And she was a tour guide. And she said there's one culture that is the absolute worst tourists because you'll be taking a picture and they'll come and stand right in front of your picture. And they'll they have no sense of personal space. They have no sense of politeness. It's all about them, and it's all about they can see that they can get whatever they want, that they can take pictures of the buffalo in Yellowstone from 5 feet away. Right? You know exactly who I'm talking about.
Yeah. They get ran down. Oh, this is Disney World. Yeah, totally. Well, speaking of cultures, I actually did kind of a deep dive into a cool cultural thing in Japan.
Japan is kind of an anomaly.
There's a Japanese word for selfless hospitality. It's called omotenashi. Omotenashi. And it means to wholeheartedly look after guests. So it's there's kind of two parts of the word. Omote, it means public face, and nashi means nothing. So kind of further supports the idea of not expecting any sort of reward, which would make your public face look better. So it's kind of like this culture that they have to, you want to show that you are that you are gracious. So in a way, I kind of compare it to Southern hospitality, right? There are ways of being hospitable in the South. Oh, hey, welcome to the neighborhood. Here's come over for dinner. Let me help watch your kids, or let me invite you over for this, or let's do this for you. So that's hospitality. Or I'll talk to you in the grocery store, or I'll let you ahead. That people talk about in the South. It's similar to this, and I think it's really cool. So some of the tenets of this is that it can be seen specifically in like restaurants in the way that they serve you at a restaurant, or it can be seen in the way that they pack your groceries. There was a gal that I worked with once, and she went to Japan, and she came back and she had bought like some treats for us, and it was still like in the plastic. It was a paper bag, kind of like a paper grocery bag, and she was like, "Oh, I got this little treat for you, or whatever. And I was like, oh, cool. So I opened it up, and it was packed in there so meticulously. It was like someone took the most care to pack it into the grocery bag.
Kind of took pride in the job they had.
And I was like, wow. And she was like, oh, yeah. She was like, that's how they do things in Japan. It's just like everything is for the customer. They want to make sure it's done right. Very hospitable. And that's so seeing this, I'm like, oh, yeah, I've actually experienced that myself a little bit. So there's there's the tea ceremonies, which are often ways that people will invite you in. They'll have a tea ceremony, and it's very like servant oriented. So it's considered the cornerstone of Japanese culture. Whether they're welcoming someone into their home, school, or workplace, or business establishment, Japanese people see it a privilege to be able to anticipate their guests' every need. So I think that it's kind of a cool culture to have. In fact, I was watching a thing on social media where this lady was talking about the differences in being gracious in different cultures. In Japan, if you go and when you go to someone's house, it's customary to bring a gift, and you bring a gift and you give it to them, and in that culture you take the gift and you put it aside and you open it later, and it shows that you have discipline to look at the gift later, and it shows respect for the guest. Whereas in America, it's also very gracious to bring a gift. If you go to bring a gift, or sometimes people will bring like a bottle of wine if someone invites you over for dinner, something to drink, or they'll bring something, a gift maybe for the family or whatever. Usually it's like, oh, open it right now, I want to see what it's like. And then person opens, it's like, oh, thank you so much, this is really cool. So they want to have that experience together. But if someone came to your house and they said, hey, here's a gift, and you're just like, I'm going to put it aside, that it's like, oh, that's weird. Like, remember when Melania Trump, when they were doing the exchange at the White House, and she gave Michelle Obama a gift, and Michelle Obama just looked at the gift. She's like, oh, what am I supposed to do with this? And she just tosses it to one of her guys. That's not how you're supposed to do it. So instead of like, oh, thank you, it's just like, oh, now I have to hold this in my hand. Dang it. So anyway, I thought that was kind of a cool way to be gracious, cool culture of graciousness that can be adopted by lots of people. And it shows strength. I mean, you think about the Japanese culture. I would not say that they're a culture of weakness. We've talked about the rules of Bushido. We've talked about, heck, we had to literally nuke these guys to get them to stop fighting to the last man, or else World War II would have gone on forever. I mean, these guys can be ruthless,
Talked about the endless wind. Was it kamikaze?
Kamikaze, the furious wind, or what is it? Like the furious wind from the west, or something like that. Yeah. So we talked about the history there and of the samurai. I mean, cool history. They've got a great culture. That's also, they have a strong culture of graciousness and hospitality, and you can have that too. One other comment that I was thinking about is there used to be this Twitter account, at least they used to follow when I worked back at Goldman Sachs, and it was like Goldman Sachs, like things overheard in a Goldman Sachs elevator. I think one of it's just like funny jokes and stuff, and one of them was like, it's like they're kind of like elitist type jokes about poor people. I think the one said like Groupon is like the goodwill of the middle class.
That's how I paid for my honeymoon.
Yeah, so they're just kind of funny jokes like that. But one of the things that was on there, or at least was like rules to live by a Goldman Sachs employee or veteran or something like that. It was a lot of those things in there were like about being gracious. It's like always pay the tab, always carry the extra cash in your pocket, like always be gracious. And then it was about like being gracious, not being a cheapskate, not being like someone who's just like, oh, we have to, nickel and diming kind of a thing, And so I think that in a way, being gracious, being hospitable, I think in a way there is a power in that, a masculine power to be able to say, yeah, when someone comes into my home, I want them to feel welcome. I want them to feel comfortable. I want them to feel at home. I want them to feel welcome. Just like they can, hey, you didn't want a drink. You want, you need to just relax. What do you need? And so I think that making someone feel comfortable in an environment where, especially in your home, is incredibly important. I've been into homes where I didn't feel welcome, or not incredibly welcomed. I was on my mission. I mean, you walk in people's home all the time, and you're like, oh, I definitely don't belong here, or I'm not welcome here. The 10-foot Santa Muerte statue in the corner is not exactly vibing with me right now.
Or at least somebody in the house gives you the death glare because you're there.
Yeah. But anyway, so like graciousness isn't necessarily the antithesis of masculinity. I think it is an integral part of masculinity.
Yeah, completely agree. That's a great example, just from a cultural standpoint of graciousness, and I could definitely see that. So what I kind of did was I kind of broke it out into ways that someone can be gracious and maybe some examples. And then I got a little bit into digging into what's kind of the intersection between that masculinity and then graciousness. And is it possible to be too gracious, right? If you're too gracious, then can that etch away at that masculinity or that strength? So then I have some examples for that. So let's see, ways to be gracious. So a couple of the things that popped out here was, number one, respectful communication, using direct and clear language with someone that is, non-attacking or non-confrontational to a certain extent. So being considerate of other people's opinions or feelings. I was on a meeting with an external supplier at work, and it was kind of interesting because we were talking about work, and it was a call, great call or whatever, and then all of a sudden the conversation kind of turned to like political, and then it almost got like really uncomfortable, and it was like, there was some bashing going on and there's some different things, and it was just like, oh man, I kind of had to like hold my tongue a little bit to just like try to keep it professional.
This was an external vendor?
Yeah.
You should have been like, hey man, we're not gonna have any of that here. In fact, you could just, all those recs you just asked me for, you could just cancel those right now. Or don't. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. It was interesting. So another one is just kind gestures, offering something without an expectation of receiving something in return. And that can be anything from, a friendly smile, or holding the door, or letting somebody go ahead of you, or it could even be, with your spouse, bringing, flowers, or, taking a little extra time to let her relax, or something like that.
Or your employee, or like people, your coworkers too.
For sure.
Bringing in some donuts and saying, hey, I know it's been a hard week. Or one time, I think this is more like appreciation, but one time, like, I was having to be late on some calls in the evening, like 10, 11 o'clock, because we were meeting some people in like China and Singapore, and I was on the calls, just kind of helping with some stuff. And it was just like a once a month, it was like a once a quarter thing. And after my boss gave me like a $50 gift card to like Ames, to like the movie theater. He was like, hey, thanks for jumping on those calls. And it was like,
that's cool.
I really appreciated that. I was like, oh, this is really nice. Yeah. It was just a small gesture of kindness and appreciation that I really thought was cool.
Yeah. I've heard some things of, sometimes when, it was kind of like a small business that this guy joined, and whenever he joined the small business, the kind of the owners of the company or whatever, they had the guy's address or whatever, and they sent his wife a care package, right? And saying, hey, we know that this is not only your husband that's gonna be spending time and dedicating it towards our company, but we want to appreciate you too for letting him, or not letting him, but supporting him in his decision to come work for us, which I thought was kind of cool.
Pretty bold to assume that he's married to a woman.
Yeah, well, I guess it could have been partner. Listening actively, showing genuine interest when somebody's talking to you. I think that's definitely something to be gracious, right? Have you ever been talking to someone who's like staring at their phone, and it's just like, are they really listening? And sometimes I even try to make it like if I'm talking to someone and it's something important that I need to write down, and I pull out my phone, I'll even say specifically like I'm writing down what we're talking about so that I can remember, like so that they don't just think I'm just like pulling out my phone to text or something like that.
Active listening is huge.
Yeah,
Also active. And sometimes we don't do it on the podcast because it just kills. It's weird with the audio. So like if you're talking, I'm saying, yeah, yeah, and I'm not like, and I'm not in my head. It just kind of messes with the audio. So it's better just to be quiet during those times when you're speaking. But active listening is so important, to be looking people in the eyes, nodding, smiling, saying, oh yeah, yeah, or asking follow-up questions or saying, oh, interesting. People want to talk to you more about that. But if you're not interested, and then like it makes you a more engaging person.
Yeah, 100%. Express appreciation. We talked about that. Maintain composure. I think that's one big one. Staying calm and composed in challenging situations. I think this is something definitely with the kids. Sometimes it's hard. Admitting your own mistakes. I think that's definitely something. Apologizing sincerely when you learn a lesson or there's an experience to be had. Being generous is also very gracious.
Yep.
Kind of like that.
Give a gift.
Yeah, your boss sent you the gift card. I think that's something definitely important. Offer encouragement, support of other people in their thoughts and goals. Showing empathy and practicing gratitude. Those are all things. I mean, I think we've talked about a lot of those things on the podcast before. I mean, those are those are all ways to show graciousness. But whenever you look at those, you don't think weakness.
Yeah. A couple additional ones I had was just thoughtfulness. We've talked about being self-aware, right? Welcoming. We already kind of talked about that. Being thankful. We talked about gratitude before on the podcast. I think it was one of our earliest attributes we talked about.
Yeah.
Show grace under fire. So when there is true strength shown when like the cards are down and we're in a tough situation. So like you're against the clock at work and you're getting you're trying to get something done, and can you be gracious then? It's like it's easy to be gracious when you have, it's just a perfect scenario, right? But when your talents really show and when these attributes really matter is when the going gets tough. It's easy to be patient when you're just a single person, you don't have anybody to be patient with. But once you have 4 kids running around the house and you're like, okay, I need to be patient with these little human beings, that's when your patience is tested, or you're in the car for 12 hours driving across the country and you're just like, I want to tear my hair out. That's when it's tested. So there's one more here that know the difference between disagreeing and being disagreeable. Kind of something similar to what you said, but I just thought it was a unique way of saying it. That you can be gracious in a conversation and disagree with somebody, but without being disagreeable.
Yeah, those are some great additional tips.
And humor's a great way to do that.
Yeah. And, I mean, like I said, those different ones that we went through, you would kind of think about those when you're building your own personal creed, and you wouldn't think, like, you wouldn't really compare that to weakness. But here's a couple things that I thought maybe if you is it possible to take graciousness too far?
And here's too far, I think.
And here's some examples that I thought were actually pretty cool. So one was over apologizing. Oh, I'm sorry for this, sorry for that, sorry, over apologizing. And one thing that I learned and that I try to do in my professional life as well, actually in life in general, is sometimes it's better to, instead of like apologizing for something, which kind of brings the whole tone of the conversation down, you actually give somebody a compliment. So if I'm running a couple minutes late to a meeting, and I'm at work and I hop onto the meeting a couple minutes late, instead of saying, sorry guys, sorry I'm so late. Instead of saying that, I typically try to say, thank you so much for being patient. I really appreciate it. right? And then that kind of lifts the whole conversation up. The person's like, oh, yeah, no problem, instead of like, oh, I'm sorry. So kind of excessive over apologizing can kind of make someone seem weak to a certain extent. It can almost feel like a lack of self-confidence.
Yeah. But is that graciousness though? Is apologizing gracious? Being gracious?
Yeah, I'm sure. Being willing to, apologize in let's say you were walking and you stepped on somebody's foot and you're like, oh, I'm so sorry. Right? I didn't mean to do that. I think that's definitely, being gracious with another person instead of being like, what were you doing there? Why are you in my way?
Yeah.
Right? I think that's definitely kind of the difference between gracious, being, giving someone some grace and not. Another one is excessive self-sacrifice. I think always putting someone else's needs before your own needs or the needs of your family.
Yeah.
I think that can be that could be too much, right? Another one is avoiding conflict at all costs. This one's an interesting one because I think to a certain extent, being gracious is sometimes when you're confronted with a sticky situation, right? You can be gracious in the situation and de-escalate. But if everything you do is to avoid conflict all the time, I think there is times where conflict is needed. I was watching this YouTube video and it was it was this guy and he was going around and he was in like, I don't know, he's in California somewhere. But he was going around, he was stopping men on the street and doing like a little interview with them. And he asked them a couple questions, but one of the questions he asked, he said, let's say you were, at a bar with your wife. And that was one of the questions he asked if they were married or whatever. What would you do if you were at the bar with your wife? And a guy came up to you and just spit in your wife's face. What would you do? And a lot of the guys were like, well, I mean, he must have had a reason to do it, so I probably would say, well, let's talk about this. What's going on? What happened?
You turn on your gay voice.
Yeah. And so, and then there was only, I'd say 90% of the people that interviewed were like, oh, I wouldn't, I just, he's probably just having a bad day. There's no reason to whatever else. And it was like two guys were like, I freaking punched that guy right in the face. Right? Or I would get in his face and I would like confront the situation. Yeah. And there's other examples of that too. There's like,
that's like the one where they say they ask a bunch of moms like, would you kill for your child? And then these moms are like, oh, I don't know. I don't think so.
I could do that.
I don't think I couldn't. I'm like, are you kidding me? Yeah. You have no idea.
If it's a life or death situation.
And maybe if it's a life or death and I knew the person was bad, then I could kill them for my kid.
Yeah.
Man, I don't care. It's like if someone's threatening my kid, it won't take much.
Yeah. Sometimes always deferring decisions to other people. Right? From a graciousness perspective, sometimes it is good to let other people speak up, to let other people, make decisions and things like that. But it can go too far into the sense of being just completely indecisive about stuff and being like, oh, well, I'll let you make the decision. Oh, you go ahead. Right? A lot of times from a masculine standpoint, it's like I've seen this. A lot of times my wife, she's just like, just make a decision. And that's probably even more gracious because then she doesn't have to make a decision.
Well, I think that in some cases, thinking about being too gracious, sometimes I think that, and I've seen this in corporate America sometimes, and sometimes women will get, and this isn't having to do with men, but sometimes women who are often very gracious in nature, they will be talking on a call, and then they'll just some guy will just start talking over them. And I've noticed that some women will they'll just be like, oh, this guy's interrupting me, and so I'll just stop talking, which is kind of first of all, it's not gracious on his part to do that, but they'll just start talking over. But some women who have kind of been around for a while, they'll just keep talking until the guy stops talking because they were talking first, and it was rude of him to interrupt.
Yeah.
And it's kind of a weird situation when that happens because, and you can tell who are the more seasoned women because they've had to deal with some of this stuff. Where like a guy will just jump in and just like, and when she's in like the middle of making her point or whatever, and she'll just keep talking until he shuts up. And it's kind of like, in those scenarios, you've almost had to be more bold and assertive with what you want because people are not being gracious to you. So I think in that sense, being overly like, oh no, go ahead, or oh, it's your turn, that is great in polite society, but when people are acting like dogs,
yeah,
I mean, if people are,
you almost got to match the
if people are piling and like
match the level,
piling on the lifeboat and getting off the Titanic, and they're like, oh, I gotta get, or on the
when death is on the line,
yeah, or they're piling on the boat to go ashore at to the daily on the Carnival Cruise they do their daily excursions. It's like, oh man, I better get while the getting's good, or I'm not going to get on, And so it's almost like it creates this like animalistic, like post-Katrina
yeah, seriously,
environment where you have to
Superdome.
So, but I think it's a marker of a polite society, or polite society is a marker of an advanced society because they've put aside selfishness, they've put aside rudeness, and also it is important to extend grace, but if grace is not reciprocated, it's hard to keep that going if you're trying to extend grace and people are treating you like an animal.
Yeah, for sure. The last one I had here, and I thought this one was great, was being overly complimentary. And so I kind of equate this one to, I feel like it is gracious as a man or a woman to compliment someone else. Like, hey, your beard is looking fly this afternoon, or like even when somebody does a good job on like a project, like, hey, you did a great job. Compliments are very strong tools to build other people's confidence or to show appreciation, right? But if you are overly complimentary, it can sound desperate. Right, I'm thinking of like in like the dating scene.
Yeah.
Right. If you're constantly like, oh, you're so beautiful, you're so attractive, I love you so much. Do you love me? I love those shoes. I love you. I love everyone. It's just like, oh, it's almost like it can be too much to where you're like, dude, just like calm down, man.
Or what's your angle?
Yeah. Or it could come across as like super needy, or super like, salesy. I don't know if you ever gone to buy a car, and the used car, the car salesman is like, oh man, that's a great pair of shoes you got on there.
You've been working out, man.
Yeah,
you're looking so strong.
Oh, you're looking
today.
so big. I that happened to me
Kinda
one time.
Butter you up.
Yeah, that happened to me one time. I was buying a car, and it was a truck, and it really kind of rubbed me the wrong way. And I was buying a truck, and I ended up talking the guy down. It was like $1,500 from the. It was a used truck, right? $1,500 from the ticket price, and we were sitting in there, and we were kind of doing the finances for the truck and everything, and he was writing it up, and it was just like he couldn't compliment me enough, and it was like. He's like, oh man, you really talked me down. You really talked me down. And then he ran my credit, and he's like, oh, you've got the best credit I've ever seen. It's like, and this, I was like in college, and then one of the other guys that was across the hallway, he's like, hey John, I sold that blue truck, and John, the other guy was like, oh well, how much did you talk you down? And he's like, he talked me down $1,500, and they were like. And he was like, "Oh man, you giving this thing away?" And it was like, "Oh, this guy's so smart." And they were like paying me these compliments, but it was almost like under the table, like passive aggressive. Like I could tell they were like making a mockery of me.
Yeah.
With like being overly complimentary.
Yeah.
And it really rubbed me the
Or
wrong
like, dude,
way.
he's getting a lemon.
Yeah, I mean, it was like it was just kind of like,
Let's make him think he got something with the $1,500.
And I was young. I mean, I didn't really know a whole bunch about a whole lot, and it was a decent deal on the truck, and so we kind of we got it and we went off, and I was happy with it. But I remember driving home, and I was like, it gave me, to use the young kids' words, it gave me the ick.
Yeah.
Right? It was just like, man, that guy was a d-bag. Like.
Yeah.
I could tell, like, it was almost like he was making a mockery of me with these compliments that were, he's being so nice and so like what he, I guess, could be interpreted as being gracious.
Yeah.
But really he's just being a jerk. And so,
well, I think that's actually, I think it's interesting because I think in some scenarios it's actually good. I've heard that with like coaching or with employees, for every one negative comment you give of feedback, you need to give 3 compliments.
Good compliment sandwich.
And so that's kind of how I've coached soccer quite a few times. I help coach the kids jiu-jitsu. And so I'm always given, I feel like I want to be a person who compliments people. I want when people are around me, they feel like I uplift them. That's something we're trying to teach our kids right now. It's like uplift people. It's very easy to tear people down. Oh man, you're looking like a schlub today, or especially guys, they always tear each other down. But I think I want to kind of turn that and raise people up. And you can still joke with people, but you can raise them up, And so, and sometimes you have to do it carefully when you're just talking with like just random people or guys, because they might feel like you're trying to butter them up or whatever, or it's like, hey, this is weird. But a well-placed compliment is always good. But especially in sports, it's like, hey, you're doing this good. You dribbled that ball really good that time. You did it. You were running really good. You kept the ball close to your feet, but you couldn't stop it on the end line. I want you to stop it before you get to the end line. And so, so that's how I like to coach. I love to give tons of compliments, especially for little kids. I mean, they need to know when they're doing well. And I'm like, you're doing great here, you're doing great here, but you need to pass the ball. And they're like, okay. And even with employees, I had a team that I worked with when I was at Vanguard, and I would, we'd be present on a call, and maybe they did something that was really stupid. Maybe they put their foot in their mouth, or they said something they shouldn't have said, or they, butted into an executive. Like oftentimes we would present to a bunch of executives, and oftentimes they would talk back and forth. And then, sometimes we just let them have that conversation and then chime in when necessary. So let's say we were in a meeting, some guy chimes in at kind of the wrong time and says kind of an off-the-wall comment that really the question wasn't for him. After the meeting, we would always do a retrospective after the meeting, or an after-action review. And I would say, hey, you did great on this, great on this, great on this, and great on this. I liked how you did this. I liked how this meeting flowed. But these are the things that we need to work on, these things. And yeah, we're all adults and people can handle like, criticism. You could say that, but I think it's important to compliment people on the things they do well. Hey, the timing on that presentation was great. The way that you opened up the meeting was great, but slide 4 was an absolute disaster. Like, see, that way they can say, hey, well, I didn't do everything wrong, and so. I don't know. Maybe that's just my style of management, but that's just kind of how I
think that goes along closely with generosity. I think generosity isn't always about money. I think sometimes you can be generous in your compliments. And like I said, I think complimenting can be a very, very powerful tool for sure.
I think we could use more people complimenting in the world without. And this goes back to the thing I was talking about.
Maybe it's genuine compliments.
Yeah, without the expectation of something in return.
Yeah.
I think that'll uplift the world a lot, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it's been great. Yeah, I think it's important to add graciousness into your personal creed. There's definitely some things that I will do, and looking back and some of the ways to be more gracious. I think one of the things that I pulled out was active listening. I think I can be a little bit better at that. Especially when it comes to some of my close relationships with my wife and my kids. So I think that's one thing that I'm going to do, be a little bit more gracious and giving people the attention they deserve with active listening.
I love that. Yeah, there's so much here, and teaching your kids this is something that we're trying to teach my kids right now, is to be gracious in their compliments, to lift people up, not tear them down. And it's done by modeling that, and model these behaviors to your children, and then they will know how to compliment people. They'll know how to be gracious. They'll know how to welcome a guest into your home, or how to be polite, how to say yes, ma'am, no, ma'am, yes, sir, no, sir, how to open the door. And I think that's the mark of true sophistication and class, when you can be gracious. No, classless people are not gracious.
How you treat others.
And it doesn't have anything to do with money either.
No.
You can be poor as dirt, and you can still have class, and you can still be gracious. There were people that I knew in Mexico when I was there that were poor as dirt, but they would make us scrambled eggs because they knew that we've been walking the streets all day. And they were just very gracious and loved to have us in their home and loved to visit with us. And so you don't have to be rich to be gracious, but it is a mark of class and a level of a discipline as well.
Yeah.
So incorporate that into your creed, teach the kiddos, and as we do all this, we will build the ideal creed. So thanks for joining us, and let's build our creed together.
All right, let's do it.